Okay. So we'll talk to the people who are assembled here. I had tentatively decided to put the exam and open the window for the exam Monday morning and close it Tuesday evening. Does that work?
Of what week?
Next week. So Monday starting at 8. I mean, I don't know what your schedules are. The only thing that we do differently is that you'll see your score, but you won't see what answers were right and what answers were wrong. Until because people will take it differently just for security of the exam. It doesn't look good if you don't let anybody. So what'll happen is probably like by Thursday, in case there's somebody late and I have to make special arrangements by Thursday sometime, then you'll be able to see what you got. What was the answers right, and if there's an error on the key or something like that. I double checked it this morning. There's 55 questions. I allotted 65 minutes. I mean, you can presume it's open book, open note, whatever you want to call it. It's fine with me. Okay. Speaking of, where did she go? Oh my goodness. Olivia never misses.
Looks like she's trying to join.
Yeah.
Here you are. No, you can't come in. Someone wants to join the call. Who? Where? Uh, are you in? Oh yeah, you're in. Okay. Glad to see you or hear you. We were just talking about you, so we'll give you. The window for the exam is going to right now, and I'll have a password. I'll send you all I usually do. Again, consider it open book, open note, whatever you want to call it. 65 minutes, 55 questions. It'll open at 8 a.m. Monday morning, whatever date that is, and close Tuesday 8 p.m. whatever day that is next week, whatever they were, the 14th and the 15th, right? Yeah, tax day. I should punish you. Ugh. Still waiting for H&R to get my wife's taxes done. It's crazy. Oh my goodness. We it's easier. We each file separately because you do that a lot with second marriages. Mine are easy. I got a W-2. It's not hard. She's the one with the business. Oh gosh. All right, let's get started. So where we left off. Effectively, we see this mechanism we see the reverse of this mechanism when the blood gets to the lung. We have something called the alkaline tide. Okay, so basically this is how hydrochloric acid works in your gut. They're called proton pumps because that's what they pump. The parietal cells that are there in the gastric pits, they pump it from carbonic acid breakdown into the stomach. So the carbonic acid's in the bloodstream. The cells facilitate that by way of these proton pumps and put it into the lumen, into all the liquid that's within the stomach. As that's pumped into the stomach lumen, bicarbonate is exported back to the blood, okay, via a chloride and bicarbonate antiporter. So what's happening is the bicarbonate is coming back into effectively because you're pumping protons out. You have really, relatively speaking, bicarbonate-laden blood. And the chloride being pumped out joins with the hydrogen, makes hydrochloric acid. So we see and you'll see that, and as I recall in the lung, we reverse this process. So they show it to you a little bit here. Again, within the framework is particularly, here's the carbonic anhydrase mechanism. It's in here. Here's the lumen. So by way of doing these things, I mean, various things. Potassium plays a role with this with regard to the ATP. There's an elaborate mechanism that's there. But the parietal cell is basically bringing in the chloride, pumping out the bicarbonate. It's taking the carbon dioxide out of the blood, effectively out of the fluid that's here associated with the blood capillary, mixing it with water in the cell, as you can see, and eventually producing as it exits this, what we call the alkaline tide. And that's where you have to know that there's an alkaline tide, and this is where it's the bicarbonate, -1 charge, chloride, -1 charge, how we get there. It goes over all the stuff. Stomachs stretch, and it's called receptive relaxation. Okay? So 2 factors you can see cause pressure to remain constant to about a liter and a half of food. That's fairly full. I mean, you're talking the better part of 2 quarts. So reflex mediated relaxation is smooth muscle coordinated by swallowing center in the brain. So it's a stress relaxation. The hollow organs stretch in this case without necessarily increasing their tension. We get to a certain point, and that's where the sense of distension or being overstretched is what you and I may or may not get, depending on if we're going, really wild eating. I get that because my stomach's been halved twice. I know I'm going to have a big impact on me. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I can't. I'm the one who sits there and picks at stuff. So to me, it's always small meals more frequently, because I can only have so much stretch that's there. Peristaltic waves move the food toward the pylorus, 3 per minute. The waves, they call that a basic electrical rhythm. There's a fancy name for the cells, the interstitial cells of kale that do it. And again, they're pacemaker cells. Okay? Nothing really exciting. Most of this, the gastrin that's secreted by the enteroendocrine cells, in general makes the stomach become, that's really the principal things that make the stomach active. Again, acetylcholine can do it. Okay. Histamine can do it. That's why we have those H2 blockers for people sometimes as a quote unquote antacid. Prilosec and the Nexium, they work on that proton pumps. That's how they block that activity. But stretching it and the gastrin itself is really what leads to the motion that's there. So most of these, it's almost like self-governance for most of the organs that are there. As it goes from the wider area in the body of the stomach, it makes its way down with pylorus is where it narrows, it gets busy. And what happens, it's pummeled over those rugal ridges. It's pummeled with a high concentration of hydrochloric acid. It's pummeled with the proteins being finally exposed to the first thing that starts to break them down, with pepsin being activated. You have lipase still in there. You still have the amylase that came from the mouth. You have lipase now from the stomach, as well as the lingual lipase. And the end result of all of this, okay, and you really don't start to get to the nucleic acid, nucleotide stuff, so you really start to break down cells themselves. We really get down into the interiors, the organelles. So as you can see, about 30 for every, and it's an ounce of chyme, 3 milliliter spurts to duodenum. The rest is kind of pushed back. Tiny half-teaspoon spurts of this highly concentrated, highly acidic material is pushed out. If we don't have controls over that, if too much spits out, that's when you're leading to things called duodenols, where now you have this acid-laden, nasty stuff that the duodenum at that area does not have time to neutralize. Only liquids and small particles are allowed to pass through that pyloric valve, and they just show you how it works through it, et cetera, et cetera. And you give me an idea of the turbulence as you get into the antrum area, which is sort of the entryway into that pyloric area. So the duodenum plays a role. That's the start, the first loop of the small intestine. You'll recall this is the duodenum. It's the smallest, but surely the most important area, if nothing else, for the presence of what we call the hepatopancreatic sphincter and ampulla, but the reality is the good old common bile duct. Okay, again, duodenal receptors to stretch and chemicals. They have an enterogastric reflex and what are called enterogastrones that begin to slow down gastric secretion and to some extent even duodenal filling. So they're trying to have agents that are going to keep it from pushing large amounts. This might surprise you. It takes about 4 hours on average, okay, but sometimes it can increase depending on how fatty the meal is. It sort of dovetails into forensics, which people would go into. The stomach contents play a very useful way in predicting. Vegetables, particularly like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cauliflower, they take a long time to break down. So if we know when somebody ate and they had a big salad, let's say, you know, that was in the OJ case where she had Nicole Brown Simpson, OJ's ex-wife, who was murdered. She had a pasta primavera at the restaurant that was here, and that was how they were able to time, you know, the time of her death was not, it was going to be accurate anyway. But just for instance, see, everybody got kind of interested in forensics because we'd never really heard these brilliant forensic who some of them are still around, near retirement age, begin to talk about it. Most of them were just fascinating. Stomach empties in that time. Carbohydrate-rich chyme moves quickly through the duodenum, so carbs move faster. I mean, without getting too nutrition diet, I mean, I'm a carbaholic. I mean, my weight always goes down the minute I stop eating carbs. But that's the trouble. They move. You digest them fast. They transform to ATP and then to fat very fast. It's the only way to look at it. You can look through this chart just as easily. Excessive stretching, irritants. Well, again, vomiting is, like any reflex, is a protective reflex. So particularly when we have irritants and we have a large amount of, like alcohol, it's excessive. It's really drinking alcohol too fast before it can be neutralized that creates the problem. So, I mean, if you're inclined to have an all-day drink-a-thon, drink slowly. Not recommending it, okay? But all of those things. There's just things that inherently do it, and some people more so than others, okay? Stimulate the vomiting center, and obviously the vomiting can lead to problems associated, which leave us with these three accessory organs: liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. We looked at them anatomically. We don't have to do that again. The false ligament, one part of the liver is the same as any other part of the liver. You might remember when we looked at these hexagonal sections we call lobules. When you biopsy a liver, it doesn't matter where you get a piece of liver, it's all the same. One piece tells the story, and we can determine what kind of liver disease someone has, or how advanced it is by looking at that. So you don't have to do any of that, but I just want some things to be able to recall. We don't have to talk about effectively when we're looking at that entryway we call the porta hepatis here. Understand you have two structures coming in and one going out. Okay? The hepatic artery enters, the hepatic vein exits. The other thing, when I talk about, so it's actually four structures. The hepatic artery enters, the portal vein, remember, all the blood from stomach, the small and large intestine, that has to be processed by the liver before it can join the general circulation. So you have the principal inflow is hepatic artery and the hepatic portal vein. Once the liver is done processing it, and through a slightly different area remote to this, is the hepatic vein. So I don't know if they have that identified correctly. And the bile comes out by something called the common hepatic duct. So bile is going to go out and eventually, in many cases, be temporarily stored, perhaps concentrated in the gallbladder, and then eventually make its way, when signaled by the small intestine, by way of something called cholecystokinin, which we're going to look at here very shortly, which basically, you think of it squeezing the gallbladder and inducing the bile to come in to help digest fats. That's a non-essential tissue. The cholecystokinin will work on the liver and allow for bile to come out. So you have two inputs and one output, typically associated with each of these functional units we call the lobules. We won't go into the names of the bile duct and the cystic duct and all these ducts, but here's the idea. Here's the porta hepatis. So this is the correct way to phrase it and state it. Obviously, the artery comes in, the hepatic artery, the hepatic portal vein, in this case, comes in. An unusual case where it went from a capillary bed by the stomach, small and large intestine into a capillary bed in the liver, and then finally was collected by another venule and exits by way of the hepatic veins, which immediately enter and dump into the inferior vena cava. So effectively processing the blood to a certain extent, detoxifying elements in the blood, dealing with assembling certain amounts of proteins. The liver does a whole lot of stuff that is there. So this hexagonal structure, the lobules, and the cells are effectively identical. You might remember that even if we remove, we can do partial liver transplants. And talk about being a reproductive, as organs go. I mean, this will start to replace itself. We have learned this. Now that we have I don't know what the criteria is to use living liver transplants. I do not. But I mean, we're not bound to exclusively, as far as I know, cadaver liver or dead liver transplants. We're going to call it that. And what happens, these cells are very unusual. These, as you might recall, these capillaries are different. They're called sinusoidal capillaries. Yet they're not continuous. They're not fenestrated. There's big openings because you have big molecules that have to be processed through here. And the word I would describe to you is the blood percolates through it. It's just like it's going through layers. It's like if you have like a sand filter on a pool, or a diatomous earth filter on a pool, where you have it's coming in with all the liquid from the pool, and it just works its way through almost all of these areas of cells that are constantly interacting with it, processing it, removing stuff, adding stuff, etc. So we call it, at each corner of the lobule, you have a triad: a tiny hepatic artery or arteriole, a tiny hepatic portal vein or venule, and a bile duct going in the other direction. Voila, normal liver. If we start to see these irregular, what begins to form in the presence of hepatitis or disease are fibrous changes, and we begin to see distortion. And again, once you start to see the distortion, it may just be a transient hepatitis, and something that's treatable, or it may conceivably be something very severe, ongoing. And when you see utter destruction, I don't know what the criteria is for cirrhosis, but this is what I mean. It's coming in from all those corners, going through these banks and banks of identical hepatocytes, eventually going from the triad area, from the hepatic portal vein, being processed and being collected by the central vein, which will eventually lead to a tributary to the hepatic vein and then into the vena cava. And here are the sinusoids. There's a lot. This is another one of those areas where those antigen-presenting cells are busy. Okay, here they're called stellate macrophages. There's also what are called Kupfer, capital Kupfer cells. This is another one of those areas where, let's check out what's going on here. Voila. Great illustration. Here's the triad coming in for nourishment to the cells, coming in for the blood that has to be processed, collected at the central vein. In the meantime, it's producing bile, and bile is facilitating, eventually, it's necessary. We've got, effectively, it's an emulsifying agent. Okay, you're going to need a fat to break up a fat. In this case, it's a bipolar fat. Look at that. And 900 milliliters of bile, blood-borne nutrients, stores glucose, all of the above. So if there's anything, there's almost nothing that the liver doesn't do. It has a lot of endoplasmic reticulum, more smooth than rough, almost disproportionately so, because smooth has a lot to do with fat processing. It's one of the ways you identify it. Fat-soluble vitamins, fat storage in general. Okay, all the other things it do: stores glucose as glycogen, one of the two areas that skeletal muscle, makes plasma proteins, and detoxifies, converts the ammonia as we deaminate amino acids into urea, which is about 100 times less toxic. It's a good thing. Go, liver, go. Gotta love the liver, or live the lover. Remember what live spelled backwards is? Evil. Sin spelled backwards is nice. Yes. It's terrible. Terrible. I give up. Bile salts made from cholesterol. This is interesting. We use cholesterol. Cholesterol got a bad rap. You got to have cholesterol. It's part of your diet. I mean, most of what we used to call bad cholesterol came from an overabundance of carbs and inappropriate fats rather than healthy fats. What they did when they went cholesterol, oh, everything cholesterol-free cookies. You know what they were made of? Simple processed sugars. Nothing could have been worse for you. They had these Snackwell crackers. Oh my God, they were terrible, awful. I mean, you probably have more sugar than a Girl Scout cookie. If you can hard to believe that. I know, ridiculous. So the bile salts are how we use the cholesterol, and we recycle it very effectively. Bilirubin is again breakdown product from heme that we have to, colors the urine and feces, all the other stuff. And yes, cholesterol, triglycerides, phospholipids, electrolytes, they're all in there that are part of the bile. So some of it's going to be excreted, some of it's going to be recycled. That's the enterohepatic circulation. We conserve about 95% of the bile salts. When they started to get these medicines to treat people who are having too many, have cholesterolemias, lipidemias, the first ones started to tinker and block this mechanism. They were very, very harmful to the liver. This is a major mechanism of the liver. If you try to stop it from happening, well, if we stop that, the liver is going to have to make more cholesterol. We'll get rid of cholesterol. The trouble is you were causing a lot of problems vis-a-vis liver function. So, and they work differently. Most of the people you're going to find my age with any kind of risk factor, they're going to put on what they call statins. Okay? I started them, didn't like them, said adios. And my numbers are good because exercise and better diet. So, reabsorbed by the blood in the ileum into the small intestine, returned by the hepatic portal blood, where all the stuff comes in, and then it recycles. So 95% is recycled. And they're just showing it to you. That so viral infections, drug toxicities, mushroom, a lot of things can impact the liver. Cirrhosis is inevitably. I mean, I'm sure there's cases where chronic hepatitis from infection can lead to this problem, but typically it's alcohol. Alcohol is just such a bitter toxin to this, and eventually it destroys the liver. Okay, the trouble is in the process of doing this, whether it's hepatitis based, whether it's alcoholic hepatitis or chronic hepatitis from hepatitis B, or more likely these days, hepatitis C, the difficulty is by the time that person gets full-blown cirrhosis, they're generally not a good candidate because most likely they have some evidence of liver cancer. So the tragic case involved, the reason we have sports memorabilia can be defined in two words: Mickey Mantle. All those wonderful Paul Skeens cards, and there's a lot of great. Mickey Mantle was the source of this. These were the most coveted cards. And he, unfortunately, was a chronic alcoholic. If he had taken care of himself, he's a chronic partier and chronic alcoholic. He died before he was 65. And his liver was going. And he was in Texas where he lived a great deal of his life. And they basically transplanted a liver. They knew he had liver cancer. It was Mickey Mantle. And they try to keep him alive. And since then, there are a lot of, it's like now there's very rigid criteria certainly for using for liver transplants. I don't know what they are today, comparatively. As you can see, liver transplants are successful, but livers are scarce. We can regenerate, to its full size, 6 to 12 months after a significant amount of removal. Who is really a candidate or not, I do not know. Be interesting to look up. There'd be plenty of information at Pitt. If you knew somebody at Pitt who was involved in transplant, because it is. We live in transplant USA here. Okay. The gallbladder is an overflow tank, nothing more than that, non-essential. Good news and bad news. It concentrates the liver, the bile, it stores it, important, but it's got, as they describe it well, honeycomb folds. A lot of people, based on diet, based on hereditary factors, a lot of factors that are involved, what happens is the little granules get stuck. Sure.
So I've heard that like losing weight can increase your risk of getting gallstones. Did that ever happen with you, or since you?
No, no. In general, I think it depends on how you go about losing weight. In the old days, forgive me if this is offensive. Okay, we call them the 5 Fs. Who was prone? People who were fat, females more than males. Okay, fair, fairly complected, fertile, 40. The woman came in with some of those criteria with upper right quadrant. That was gallbladder disease, so proven otherwise. Okay, we knew now that it was 20 to 40. My daughter-in-law, who's very slender, okay, she had IVF to have my granddaughter and my grandson for that matter. But the granddaughter came first, and I mean, shortly after she delivered and had a lot of health problems, a lot of bleeding. Within a few days after that, then they have started all those fertility-based hormones, which are very much estrogen and progesterone-like substances. Guess what? She had her gallbladder. And so she was fair complected, Jill's of Swedish extraction, very fair. As the kids are like that. All the other ones, the fertile didn't go through that one. So I mean, but we used to paint with kind of a broad brush. So I don't know about the weight loss thing. Anything that puts that potentially weight loss, putting a lot of fat in your bloodstream, even temporarily, maybe that plays a role. I'm speculating. Don't know. Okay, and so again, it's not hard to remove. I don't think I scrubbed it on one of those. And so here they are, and effectively it's a blockage. The bilirubin backs up into the system. We get an obstructive jaundice. It doesn't have to be gallbladder. It can be gallstones anywhere. They can block the common bile duct. They can cause fluid to back up into the pancreas. No, all of which are bad. And even liver failure in general, because the bilirubin is not being gotten rid of. And I mean, I've seen people awaiting liver transfer. And I mean, they were very jaundiced. I love this guy. And he had the transplant, but immediately when I saw him before, it was scary. I mean, it was truly yellow skin, a big industrial worker guy who lived in Franklin. I mean, oh gosh, I knew that family well. Okay, so all of these types of things. So the good thing with stones today is what has maybe limited the amount of surgery, and they're doing the surgery laparoscopically through small incisions, so it's a little less problematic, is they do lithotripsy. They do that for kidney stones too. So basically you're sitting in a big bathtub sedated, and you're shooting sound waves, basically to disrupt the stones. I understand it's effective as much as I know about it. The other types of things, the lithotripsy I know a bit about. The other medications and things. And it's interesting, I'm saying it because I've been working up my son down in Florida for a kidney stone. He's 41 in May. I mean, he's adopted. We have no history to be able to account for that. As organs go, this is the most important when it comes. This is pure. You can live without a lot of your stomach, probably a lot of your liver that's functioning, certainly all of your gallbladder, but you can't live without any of your pancreas. Okay, the pancreas has a head and a tail. The head is sort of crooked in. You'll see the illustration. Around the duodenum surrounds it, and the tail goes all the way to the spleen. That's anatomy. It's basic. We're talking not about its endocrine function because we did that. This is its exocrine function. It leads by way of a duct called the pancreatic duct and joins the secretions, okay, about that are coming from the liver and or the gallbladder to form what we used to call the common bile duct. They now call it the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Don't care. Okay? So there's tons of these cells, and they produce all of the enzymes are in the O-gen form. Collectively, we call them zymogens. In other words, inactive precursor enzymes because they're proteolytic. You might remember telling you the anecdote when my first wife had to have a roughly slightly smaller than a softball sized tumor removed from her abdomen. A girl barely weighed 105 pounds. And when they extirpated it, the surgeon, the lady who operated, had to pull it off, starting to adhere slightly to the pancreas. She got full-blown pancreatitis. And I've never seen anybody that much pain. There's nothing you can do. Because it's pouring out. I said, what the heck's going on? She goes, this is alcoholics get this. So the pancreas is so injured, it spills out these enzymes. They get activated. They're proteolytic. We're made of proteins. It starts gobbling up your organs. So literally every time it would spit out stuff, she would be in this, we carried her back to the hospital. They readmitted her, and she was double, every time she's double over. Fluids, pain medicines, all you could do. Is there anything supportive therapy? And thankfully it did run its course. All right. So what happens, so mostly we'll look at some of these enzymes when we get further down, but they are, again, we don't have a lot of protein digestion until the stomach with pepsin. And then these are going to be the ones that do most of the work. And you're going to hear things like trypsin and chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase that are there, and all their precursors. And then the ducts are how they get it in by way of the pancreatic duct. And yes, they produce a ton of water. And as you can see here, to neutralize the stomach acid, a ton of bicarb. So we dealt with the endocrine, typical gland. You know, they're either columnar, maybe to some extent. They're typically cuboidal, maybe columnar. That doesn't really matter. Busy cells, lots of rough ends of plasmic reticulum because they're making proteins. And so what's the composition? Daily. They're part of 1.5 liters. pH 8 neutralizes the chyme, the acidic chyme. Electrolytes, bicarb. All of these different enzymes, not mostly, a large amount of proteases, inactive to prevent auto or self-destruction. Now the rest of the amylase, now more lipase, finally nucleases. Pancreas is producing all this stuff, and since it's being dumped into small intestine, that's where the vast majority of chemical digestion and absorption. There's very little absorption in the stomach other than bad stuff like alcohol and caffeine. It's not so good. Aspirin. So proteases are secreted inactive, and here are some of the names. Enteropeptidase, enzyme bound to plasma membrane, epithelial activates. And so what it does, this is the activator, and this, as you can see, bound to plasma membrane of duodenal epithelial cells. So we don't see it. This is, remember, these have, anatomically, they have a brush border. And so this would be a brush border enzyme that as soon as it comes into contact, it begins to activate these ogens. So trypsinogen becomes trypsin. The trypsin then acts cascade style, a la blood clotting, with this and with this. You don't have to know it. I just want you to have an understanding. At least know the basic names, what they are. Maybe if your path in life takes you into gastroenterology or working a lot in that area, you'll know more about it, like the rest of us do. So all of these are here. And here's that, now they call it the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Okay, yeah, it's volcano shaped. Yeah, this is the sphincter. There's even a tiny duct that adds to it. I'm sure I told you before, they had a CAT scan me for my second surgery, because if this had been compromised by the scar tissue from my first surgery, most likely you're not talking with me. let's say I'd be, no longer among us. And if I was, could not eat anything. Everything would have to be put into me and pre-digested. I'd have to have some kind of a tube. Look at me, classic. So it's not big, but this is the critical area. Again, there's an accessory duct a little bit longer from that, just about done. So when stuff begins to enter the small intestine, these are the two big players. Cholecystokinin was named because its principal action was on the gallbladder, we thought, but really impacts the pancreas as well. And secretin even sends messages to the stomach and goes, okay, enough. You're sending stuff in, take a break. See, I like to make it like the organs are talking to each other. It's like telling the stomach, all right, enough already. We'll handle it from here. Stop pushing this stuff in. But I think secretin has the wider range of activity. So large amounts of bile salts by that enterohepatic circulation. Secretin, exposed to hydrochloric acid and chyme, stimulates the gallbladder, just like cholecystokinin does. The sphincter is closed unless digestion is active. Bile is stored in the gallbladder and released to small intestine with contraction. That's the CCK plays around. And you can see all the things it does by just going step by step. We are almost done. The digestive system. We will complete it on Monday. Right? Paul, my voice is giving up. I want to get out before he does. Oh, terrible. Unless you want to stay.